The lonely signal. The silence on the planet was deafening, broken only by the occasional howl of cold wind sweeping across the barren landscape. Kana sat hunched over a rusted console in the heart of an ancient outpost, her thin, violet fingers trembling as she pressed the same sequence of buttons she had for weeks. Her large black eyes scanned the cracked screen, watching the signal pulse weakly into the void. Mayday. Anyone out there? Her voice wavered as she repeated the plea, knowing deep down that it was likely useless. She sighed, slumping back in her chair, her body weary from months of survival. The outpost creaked around her, a groaning reminder of how close everything was to falling apart. Kana wasn't supposed to be here. She was a navigator, not a survivor. Her crew had been her family, her support. They had all been lost in a single, horrifying instant when a sudden malfunction in their ship had forced them to crash land. At first, she thought help would come, but as days turned to weeks and weeks into months, her hope faded, like a dying star in the night sky. She rose from her chair and glanced out the small, dirt-streaked window. The planet stretched endlessly before her, an expanse of gray rock and lifeless valleys. There was no sign of movement, no indication that she wasn't utterly alone. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Food was scarce, and every meal had to be rationed. She ran her hand along the edge of her belt, where a small makeshift plate hung, her only defense against whatever dangers might lurk in the shadows of this forsaken world. The console let out a faint beep. Kana's heart leaped, and she scrambled back to the seat, her claws gripping the sides of the terminal. The noise was just the system resetting, a false alarm, and she slumped again, fighting the urge to scream. Her alien features twisted with frustration. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the creeping despair. For months, the silence had been her enemy, and her mind was starting to play tricks on her. Sometimes she thought she heard voices in the wind or glimpsed movement in the corner of her eye. She would spring to her feet, ready for action, only to realize it was nothing, just her imagination betraying her. Maybe no one's left out there, she whispered to herself. Her voice was hollow, a reflection of how she felt inside. Maybe the galaxy forgot me. She gazed at the cracked screen. The signal she sent was old technology, a relic of the outpost's previous inhabitants. It was a desperate gamble, unlikely to be heard, and even less likely to be understood. But it was all she had. Every evening, she sat here, transmitting the same message into the void, hoping against all odds that someone would listen. The nights were the hardest. The twin moons of the planet cast an eerie light over the wasteland, and the shadows seemed to dance with sinister intent. Kana would sit by the console, clutching her blade, her large eyes scanning the dark corners of the room for threats that never came. Sleep was rare and fleeting, stolen in brief moments when exhaustion overwhelmed her. One night, as she prepared to send her usual distress call, she paused. Her claw hovered over the transmit button. What was the point? She thought about stopping, about giving up. But the idea of silence, complete and unbroken, terrified her more than anything. So she pressed the button, and the message went out once more. Mayday. Anyone out there? The sound of her voice filled the small room, and for a moment, it felt less empty. She let the console continue its automated broadcast, leaning back in her chair with a sigh. Outside, the wind howled again, as if mocking her. Hours passed, and Kana drifted into a restless doze, her head resting on the console. She dreamt of her crew, of laughter and warmth, of a time when she wasn't alone. But the dream was shattered by a sharp noise, a different kind of beep. Her eyes snapped open. The console was blinking, a signal coming in. She stared at it in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled with the controls, her claws shaking as she tried to stabilize the frequency. The static crackled, and then a voice broke through. Hang tight. Help is coming. I'm human. Kana froze. Human. The word sent a chill down her spine. Her species had always feared humans, considering them unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerous. Yet here was one, answering her call for help. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. The voice continued, steady and calm. "Your signal was weak, but I caught it. I'll be there soon. Don't give up." Kanna's mind raced. Could she trust this stranger? Could she afford not to? She looked out the window at the endless void, her heart torn between hope and fear. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone. But was that a good thing? The humans' approach. Nathan Drake leaned back in his pilot's seat, the soft hum of his ship, Vanguard's edge, surrounding him like an old friend. The cockpit was a cluttered mess of blinking lights, coffee stains, and the occasional flicker of the screen patched together with duct tape. He tapped his fingers on the console, staring at the incoming signal with a curious grin. "This has got to be the strangest distress call I've heard yet," he muttered to himself. The voice was alien, desperate, and barely coherent through the static. He adjusted the translator settings, letting the garbled words smooth out into something understandable. "Mayday. Anyone out there?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. "Well, someone's out there all right. But where exactly is there?" He punched a few commands into the system, his ship's eye chirping in response. "Signal triangulation complete. Source located. ARX 49 Beta. Status: abandoned planet. Atmosphere: marginally habitable. Threat level: unknown." Nathan whistled low. "Marginally habitable and unknown threats. Sounds like my kind of vacation." He grinned, but beneath his easy confidence was a flicker of doubt. ARX 49 Beta wasn't on any of the usual trade routes. It was the kind of place people avoided unless they had a death wish, or something worth hiding. Still, the voice in the message stuck with him. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything, and was clinging to hope by the thinnest thread. Nathan had been there before, a long time ago. He couldn't ignore it. "All right, mystery alien," he said, strapping himself into the seat. "Let's see what kind of trouble you've gotten yourself into." He set a course for RX 49 Beta, the ship's engines roaring to life. As the Vanguard's edge broke into hyperspace, Nathan leaned back, his thoughts drifting. Humans weren't exactly known for making friends in this part of the galaxy. Most species saw them as reckless, unpredictable, and frankly, dangerous. And to be fair, they weren't entirely wrong. But Nathan wasn't here to make a good impression. He was here because someone needed help. And if there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was leaving someone behind. Hours passed in the void, the stars streaking by like ghostly trails. Nathan busied himself checking the ship's systems and preparing for the worst. His gut told him this wasn't going to be a simple rescue mission. Something about the way the signal was coming through, faint, erratic, almost drowned out by static, felt off. Like it wasn't just distance causing the interference. Approaching RX 49 Beta. Entering orbit in 5 minutes. The AI's voice snapped him back to reality. Nathan peered out the cockpit window as the planet came into view. It was a bleak, rocky wasteland, its surface pockmarked with craters and scars from ancient battles or natural disasters. The atmosphere shimmered faintly, giving the illusion of life where there was none. "Charming," Nathan muttered, guiding the ship closer. His scanners pinged, highlighting the source of the distress signal. An outpost nestled in the shadows of a jagged mountain range. It looked old, its structure weathered, and barely holding together. He adjusted his trajectory, preparing for a rough landing. As the Vanguard's edge descended, the ship rattled violently. Turbulence shook the cockpit, and warning lights flared on the console. Warning. Atmospheric interference detected. Adjusting stabilizers. Yeah, I see it," Nathan said, gripping the controls. "Just hold together for a few more minutes." The ship broke through the planet's thin atmosphere, the surface rushing up to meet it. Nathan's fingers danced over the controls, guiding the Vanguard's edge toward a flat patch of ground near the outpost. The landing was anything but smooth, The ship skidded, kicking up clouds of dust and debris before finally coming to a halt. Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his messy hair. Well, that could have gone worse. He grabbed his gear, a compact blaster, a multipurpose scanner, and a ration pack, and headed for the exit. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss, and he stepped onto the rocky surface. The air was thin and cold, biting at his skin even through his suit. He scanned the horizon, his eyes locking onto the outpost in the distance. "Looks like the place hasn't seen a visitor in a century," he muttered, starting toward it. The silence of the planet was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the ground. Every step felt heavier, as if the planet itself was resisting his presence. As he approached the outpost, he noticed faint tracks in the dust, footprints too small to be human. His curiosity deepened. Whoever had sent the signal was alive, but for how much longer? The structure looked ready to collapse, its walls sagging and its surface covered in strange, alien glyphs. Nathan paused at the entrance, his hand hovering over his blaster. Something about the place felt off. The air was thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a flickering console at the center of the room. And there, hunched over the console, was the source of the signal, a figure unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. She turned slowly, her large black eyes locking onto him with a mix of fear and suspicion. Nathan raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy there," he said, his voice calm. "I'm here to help." The alien, Kana, didn't lower her guard. Her claws twitched near a makeshift blade, and her posture was tense, ready to spring. Nathan couldn't blame her. If their roles were reversed, he'd probably react the same way. "I'm human," he added, knowing the word carried weight. "Caught your signal. Thought I'd drop by." Kana's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Nathan thought she might attack. Then she spoke, her voice trembling but defiant. "Why would a human help me?" Nathan smiled faintly, his tone steady. "Because someone once helped me when I was in a bad spot. Now let's figure out how to get you out of here before this place falls apart." Kana didn't respond, but she didn't attack either. Nathan took that as a good sign. What neither of them realized was that they weren't alone on the planet. And something, or someone, was already watching. The first encounter. The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying with it the weight of desolation. Kana crouched behind a jagged boulder near the outpost, her dark eyes locked on the stranger's ship. It was sleek but weathered, its exterior marked with dents and scorch marks that spoke of a life lived dangerously. She tightened her grip on her blade, a makeshift weapon crafted from scavenged metal. Trust wasn't something she could afford, not here, not now. The hatch of the ship hissed open, and a figure emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a battered suit that had clearly seen better days. His movements were fluid but cautious, his head turning slowly as he scanned the area. In his hand, he held a compact blaster, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Kana's stomach churned. A human. The voice from the signal had warned her, but seeing him in person sent a jolt of unease through her. Humans were dangerous. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. Stories of their unpredictable nature and their tendency to charge headfirst into impossible situations were legendary. Kana had always thought they were exaggerated. Now, staring at this man as he approached her outpost, she wasn't so sure. The human, Nathan, as he had identified himself, paused a few meters from the outpost. His posture was relaxed, almost disarming, but Kana wasn't fooled. She could see the way his eyes darted around, taking in every detail, every potential threat. He was assessing the situation, just like she was. "All right," Nathan said aloud, his voice carrying over the wind. "I know you're out here. I'm not looking for trouble, just trying to help." Kana didn't move. She knew better than to reveal herself too soon. Instead, she studied him from her hiding spot. His tone was steady, almost friendly, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that hinted at his readiness to fight if necessary. Nathan waited a moment longer, then sighed and lowered his blaster entirely. "Look, if you're worried I'm here to cause problems, you're wasting your energy. I could have ignored your signal, but I didn't. So how about we talk before we start pointing weapons at each other?" Kana hesitated. He hadn't made any aggressive moves, and his body language didn't scream hostility. But humans were unpredictable, and she couldn't forget that. Still, she couldn't let him just walk into the outpost without knowing his intentions. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind the boulder, her blade glinting faintly in the pale light. "Stop right there," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Nathan turned slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. His expression shifted to one of mild surprise as he got his first good look at her. "Well, hey there," he said, his tone light. "You must be the voice behind the distress call." Kana kept her blade raised, her stance tense. "Why are you here, human? What do you want?" Nathan tilted his head, studying her. "Same thing you want, I'd guess. To get off this rock in one piece." He gestured to his ship behind him. "Caught your signal. Figured I'd see if I could help." Kana's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe you came all this way out of what? Kindness?" Nathan shrugged. "Kindness, curiosity, boredom. Take your pick." His grin was faint but genuine, disarming in its simplicity. "Look, I get it. You've probably got every reason not to trust me. But sitting here waiting for someone else to show up doesn't seem like a great plan." Kana tightened her grip on the blade. He had a point, but she wasn't about to admit it. "What's in it for you?" "Honestly," Nathan said, his expression growing serious. "Not much. Maybe the satisfaction of knowing I didn't leave someone stranded when I could have done something about it." Before Kana could respond, a low, mechanical whine echoed in the distance. Both of them froze, their attention snapping toward the sound. It was faint but unmistakable, a rhythmic hum that sent a chill down Kana's spine. "What the hell was that?" Nathan asked, his blaster already back in his hand. Kana swallowed hard, her gaze darting to the horizon. "They're here." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Who's they?" She didn't answer, instead turning and sprinting toward the outpost. "Get inside," she shouted over her shoulder. "Now." Nathan hesitated only for a moment before following her. As they reached the outpost and sealed the door behind them, the whine grew louder, more menacing. Kana leaned against the wall, her chest heaving as she tried to calm her racing heart. "You want to help," she said, her voice sharp. "Then you'd better be ready to fight." Nathan gave her a curious look. "I take it this isn't just a friendly neighborhood welcome committee." Kana shook her head, her expression grim. "No, it's worse." Outside, the whine reached a crescendo, followed by a heavy thud that shook the ground beneath them. Nathan's grip on his blaster tightened. Whatever was out there, it wasn't friendly. And now, they were trapped together. The hidden threat. The outpost was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of ancient machinery struggling to stay operational. Nathan stood near the console, inspecting the alien glyphs glowing faintly on its surface. Beside him, Kana worked furiously, her hands moving over the controls with practiced precision. Her blade was within arm's reach, a constant reminder that trust between them was fragile at best. "You going to tell me what we're hiding from?" Nathan asked, his voice low but calm. Kana shot him a glare, her dark eyes narrowing. "They're not something you can fight with that toy," she said, nodding at the blaster in his hand. "They're machines, built to kill and smarter than you think." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Machines, huh? What kind of machines?" Kana hesitated. She didn't like revealing more than she had to, but the human needed to understand the danger. "This planet wasn't always empty," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "It used to be a research hub. My people came here to build things. AI systems, autonomous units, weapons." She paused, her expression darkening. "We built them too well." Nathan whistled low. "Let me guess. They turned on you." "Something like that," Kana said, her tone clipped. "They weren't supposed to be hostile, but something went wrong. They wiped out the research teams, dismantled the cities, and hunted down survivors. The planet was declared a quarantine zone, and no one dared come back." Nathan leaned against the console, his expression thoughtful. "And yet, here you are." Kana bristled. "It wasn't by choice." Nathan smirked faintly, but didn't press further. He could see the weight of her words in the way her shoulders tensed and her hands gripped the console a little too tightly. He'd heard enough stories about AI gone rogue to know this wasn't the time for jokes. Outside, the faint whine they'd heard earlier grew louder, more insistent. Nathan turned toward the sealed door, his grip on the blaster tightening. "So, these machines," he said. "How many are we talking?" Kana didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the console, her expression grim. "Enough." "Helpful," Nathan muttered under his breath. He glanced at the door again, his instincts screaming that something was coming. "You've dealt with them before, right? Any weaknesses?" Kana gave him a sharp look. "You don't deal with them. You run, you hide. And if you're lucky, they don't find you." Nathan's smirk faded. He was starting to understand just how bad the situation was. But running wasn't his style, not when people's lives were on the line. "Well, that's not exactly inspiring, but I'll take it under advisement." Before Kana could respond, the outpost trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a low metallic thud echoed through the structure. Kana's eyes widened. "They're here." Nathan stepped forward, his blaster aimed at the door. "All right then. Let's see what we're dealing with." Kana grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You don't understand," she hissed. "You can't fight them. Not like this." Nathan looked at her, his expression serious. "Then tell me how to fight them." Kana hesitated, her mind racing. She hated that she had to rely on this human, but the truth was, she couldn't survive alone. Not anymore. She took a deep breath and pointed to a panel on the wall. "The outpost has an old defense system. It's crude, but it might buy us some time." Nathan nodded. "That's a start. What do you need?" "Power," Kana said, already moving toward the panel. "The system's been offline for years. If we can redirect what's left of the outpost's energy, we might be able to activate the perimeter shields." Nathan followed her, his movements quick and deliberate. "All right, let's get it done." The ground shook again, harder this time. A loud screech, metallic and unnatural, echoed through the outpost, sending a chill down Nathan's spine. He glanced back at the door. "They sound eager." "They are," Kana said, her voice tight. "And if we don't hurry, they'll rip this place apart." Nathan worked alongside her, following her instructions as she rerouted power to the defense system. The console sparked and groaned in protest, but the lights flickered brighter and a faint hum filled the room. "Almost there," Kana said, her hands flying over the controls. The screeching outside grew louder, closer. Nathan moved back to the door, his blaster raised. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense of impending doom. Whatever was out there wasn't going to wait much longer. "Got it," Kana shouted. A pulse of energy rippled through the outpost, and the sound of the perimeter shields activating filled the air. For a brief moment, Nathan allowed himself to relax. But then, a deafening clang rang out as something massive slammed against the door. Kana turned to him, her face pale. "The shields won't hold forever. We need a plan." Nathan nodded, his mind already racing. "All right. Let's give these machines a reason to regret waking us up." A desperate escape. The outpost shuddered under the relentless assault of the machines. Sparks flew from the flickering lights above as the shields struggled to hold back the mechanical intruders. Kana paced near the console, her claws clicking against the metal floor, her large eyes darting between the blinking morning lights. Nathan stood by the barricaded entrance, his blaster gripped tightly, his face grim. "This is bad," Nathan muttered, his gaze fixed on the door. Each impact sent vibrations through the structure, a grim reminder that their time was running out. Kana snapped her head toward him, irritation and fear flashing in her eyes. "You think I don't know that? The shields are ancient. They were never meant to withstand this kind of assault." Nathan turned to her, his tone calm but firm. "Then we need a way out. Sitting here waiting to be overrun isn't an option." Kana hissed under her breath, clearly frustrated. "There's no way out. This outpost is surrounded by them. The moment we step outside, we're dead." Nathan frowned, his mind racing. He'd faced impossible odds before, but this was different. These machines were relentless, and Kana's desperation only made the situation feel more dire. But giving up wasn't in his nature. "What about that old defense system you mentioned?" Nathan asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Can we use it to wipe them out?" Kana shook her head. The defense system was barely functional, even before the shields drained most of the power. It's not enough to stop them. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Then we make it enough. What's the system powered by?" Kana hesitated, her gaze flickering to a sealed compartment on the far side of the room. "There's a core, an experimental energy source. It's unstable, and if it's damaged, it could level the entire outpost." Nathan's eyes lit up. "Unstable, huh? That sounds like exactly what we need." Kana stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "Are you insane? If the core goes critical, it won't just destroy the outpost. It'll vaporize everything within 100 kilometers, including us." Nathan smirked faintly. "Good thing I'm not planning on sticking around for the fireworks." Kana crossed her arms, her skepticism clear. "And how do you plan to set it off without being here to trigger it?" Nathan's smirk widened. "I've got a ship, remember? We'll set the core to overload, then get out of here before it blows." Kana's expression shifted to something unreadable. She didn't trust him, not completely, but his plan was the first glimmer of hope she'd had since the machines arrived. "It's a long shot," she said, her voice soft, "but it might work." "Long shots are my specialty," Nathan said with a grin. "Now show me where this core is." The two of them moved quickly, Kana leading Nathan to the sealed compartment. She keyed in a code, and the door hissed open, revealing a glowing sphere suspended in a containment field. The energy radiating from it was almost palpable, sending a faint hum through the air. Nathan whistled. "That's a lot of juice." Kana didn't respond. Instead, she began working on the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "I can set the core to overload remotely, but we'll only have a few minutes to get to your ship." Nathan nodded. "Then let's not waste any time." The pounding at the door grew louder, and the screeching of the machine sent a chill down Nathan's spine. He glanced toward the entrance, his instincts screaming that they were running out of time. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," he said, his tone urgent. Kana worked as quickly as she could, her claws tapping furiously against the console. Almost there. The ground shook violently as the machines breached the outer defenses. Nathan raised his blaster, his jaw set. "They're in." Kana didn't look up. Just a few more seconds. The first machine burst through the entrance, its glowing red eyes locking onto Nathan. It was tall and spindly, its metallic limbs moving with an unnatural grace. Nathan fired, the blast striking its chest and sending it crashing to the ground. But more were already pouring in, their movements relentless. "Kana," Nathan shouted. "Done," she yelled, slamming her fist onto the console. The core began to pulse, its glow intensifying. "We've got 3 minutes. Go." Nathan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. The two of them sprinted through the crumbling outpost, the sounds of the machines chasing after them. The corridors were narrow and twisted, forcing Nathan to fire blindly behind them to slow their pursuers. They burst out into the open air, the sight of the Vanguard's edge parked nearby filling Nathan with relief. "Move," he shouted, urging Kana forward. The ground trembled as the core's energy began to destabilize. The machines were relentless, their metallic bodies glinting in the faint light as they closed in on the fleeing pair. Nathan fired again, hitting one square in the head and sending it toppling into the dust. Kana reached the ship first, slamming her hand against the control panel to lower the ramp. Nathan was right behind her, his blaster smoking as he climbed aboard. The ramp closed just as the first machine lunged for them, its claws scraping against the hull. Nathan scrambled into the cockpit, Kana right behind him. "Strap in," he said, flipping switches and firing up the engines. The ship roared to life, lifting off just as the outpost exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave rippled outward, consuming everything in its path. Nathan pushed the ship to its limits, the vibrations rattling them as they shot into the sky. As the planet faded behind them, Kana slumped in her seat, her chest heaving. "You're insane," she muttered. Nathan grinned, his hand steady on the controls. "Yeah, but it worked, didn't it?" Kana didn't respond. She stared out the window at the desolate world they'd left behind, her expression unreadable. For the first time in months, she was free. But at what cost? Trust tested. The ship's engines hummed steadily as Vanguard's Edge drifted in orbit above the desolate planet, the aftermath of the outpost's explosion glowing faintly on the surface below. Nathan sat in the cockpit, running diagnostics and trying to shake the tension that still gripped him. Kana was silent, perched in the co-pilot's chair, her claws tapping rhythmically against the armrest. "So," Nathan began, breaking the silence. "Not bad for a first team-up, huh?" Kana shot him a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable. "You call that a team-up? I call that barely surviving." Nathan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Hey, barely surviving is still surviving. It's all about perspective." Kana didn't smile. Her eyes were fixed on the planet below, her thoughts distant. "The machines won't stop," she said quietly. "That explosion might slow them down, but they're relentless. They'll rebuild." Nathan turned to her, his expression softening. "And you're worried they'll come after you." Kana's claws dug into the armrest. "It's not just me. If they manage to leave that planet, they'll be a threat to anyone they encounter. My people abandoned this place for a reason. We thought we could contain the problem by quarantining the planet." She shook her head. "We were wrong." Nathan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So we need to make sure they stay grounded. Permanently." Kana's eyes narrowed. "What's this we? You've done your part, human. You could leave now and never look back." Nathan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I could," he admitted, "but that's not my style. I don't walk away from unfinished business. And besides," he added with a smirk, "you'd miss me." Kana's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Amusement, maybe, or disbelief. She turned back to the console, pulling up schematics of the planet's surface. "There's one other option," she said. "The planetary core has a failsafe, an old system designed to destroy the entire ecosystem if containment fails. It's risky, but it might be the only way to stop the machines." Nathan whistled low. "A scorched earth solution. Sounds dramatic." "It is," Kana said, her tone sharp, "and it requires someone to stay behind to trigger it manually." Nathan's smirk faded. He knew what she was implying, and the weight of it settled over him like a heavy cloak. "You're planning to go back down there," he said. Kana met his gaze, her expression hard. "It's my responsibility. My people created this mess. I should be the one to fix it." Nathan shook his head. "You're not doing this alone. If we're going to pull off something this crazy, we're doing it together." Kana frowned. "Why? You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me." Nathan shrugged, a lopsided grin creeping back onto his face. "I got a soft spot for lost causes." Kana stared at him, her claws still tapping against the armrest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ship and the faint beeping of the console. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh. "You're impossible, human. I get that a lot," Nathan said with a wink. Kana returned her attention to the schematics, her fingers flying over the controls. "If we're doing this, we need to move fast. The machines won't stay dormant for long." Nathan nodded. "All right, let's make a plan." The two of them worked in tense silence, mapping out a route to the planetary core and calculating the time they'd need to activate the failsafe and escape. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility considered. But no matter how they ran the numbers, one truth remained. The odds were stacked against them. As they finalized the plan, Nathan leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms. "You know, I'm starting to think I might regret this." Kana arched an eyebrow. "You're just realizing that now." Nathan laughed, the sound breaking through the tension like a crack of sunlight in a storm. "Better late than never." Kana shook her head, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Let's hope your confidence is as indestructible as you think it is." Nathan stood, clapping his hands together. "Don't worry. I've got a good feeling about this." Kana muttered something under her breath in her native language, but Nathan didn't ask for a translation. He didn't need one to know it was probably something about him being reckless or insane, or both. As they prepared to descend back to the planet, Kana hesitated at the airlock, her claws gripping the edge of the doorway. "If we don't make it—" "We'll make it," Nathan interrupted, his voice firm. "No if. We're getting out of this." Kana glanced at him, her expression softening ever so slightly. "You're annoyingly optimistic, you know that." Nathan grinned. "Part of my charm." With that, they stepped into the airlock, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. For better or worse, they were in this together now, and there was no turning back. The human spirit. The explosion rocked the ground, a cascade of light and energy ripping through the planet's core. Kana barely made it onto the ship, her legs trembling as she collapsed into the co-pilot's seat. The roar of destruction echoed behind them, a visceral reminder of how close they had come to being obliterated. Nathan's voice crackled over the ship's comm system. "Engines at full burn. Hold on to something." Kana gripped the edges of her seat, her claws digging into the metal. The Vanguard's edge surged upward, tearing through the planet's thin atmosphere. The tremors of the explosion hot on its trail. Every second felt like an eternity as the ship struggled against the gravitational pull and the violent shockwaves rippling from the destruction below. Finally, they broke free, the stars coming into sharp focus as the planet shrank in the viewport behind them. Kana exhaled sharply, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. "We made it," she muttered, barely believing the words. Nathan's laughter came over the comm, light but tinged with weariness. "Did you ever doubt me?" Kana snorted, sitting up straighter. "About 100 times." The ship leveled out in orbit, the alarms silencing one by one, as Nathan brought the systems back under control. A few moments later, he emerged from the cockpit, his face smudged with soot and his usual grin plastered across his face. "Well, that was fun." Kana glared at him, her arms crossed. "You call that fun? We nearly died." Nathan shrugged, collapsing into the seat across from her. "Nearly dying makes you appreciate living. You should try it more often." Kana rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress the small smile creeping onto her face. "You're insufferable. Part of my charm," Nathan quipped, leaning back and letting out a long breath. His grin softened as he glanced at her. "But seriously, you did good back there. You held your own." Kana looked away, her gaze drifting to the viewport where the remnants of the planet glowed faintly. "We stopped them. For now. But I'm not sure it's enough. What if something survived? What if they rebuild?" Nathan leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Then we deal with it, together." Kana frowned, her brow furrowing. "Why? You've already done more than enough. Why would you stay involved?" Nathan hesitated, his grin fading. "Because I've been where you are," he said quietly. Lost, outnumbered, and thinking no one's coming to help. But someone helped me once. Saved me when I didn't deserve it. I guess I'm just paying it forward. Kana studied him, her sharp features softening. She had spent so long assuming the worst of others, convinced that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Nathan's actions had proven her wrong. Again and again. Humans, she said finally, shaking her head. You're impossible. Nathan chuckled. We get that a lot. The ship's lights dimmed slightly as it entered low-power mode, the soft hum of the engines a comforting background noise. Kana stood, stretching her stiff limbs. So, what now? Nathan tilted his head thoughtfully. Well, I was thinking we could grab some food and fix this bucket of bolts before it falls apart. After that, who knows? Kana arched an eyebrow. You mean you don't have a plan? Plans are overrated, Nathan said with a grin. I prefer to see where the stars take me. Kana sighed, but there was no real frustration in her tone. For the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. As the Vanguard's edge drifted into the vast expanse of space, the faint remnants of the destroyed planet fading into the distance, Kana glanced at Nathan. You're going to get yourself killed one day, you know. Nathan smirked. Maybe, but not today. Kana shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The machines were gone, the danger momentarily behind them, but the future was uncertain. And yet, with this human at her side, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could face whatever came next. All right, human, she said, sitting back down and pulling up the star charts. Let's see where the stars take us.